course, Brother Robert Davidson continues to recover from his fall. He broke his arm in 2 places and busted his shoulder up pretty bad. So we certainly want to remember him in our prayers, Sister Joyce Baptiste and others. I'm happy to be able to introduce rather tonight to you Brother Tommy Tidwell. I mean, he's no stranger to us. We've all known him for many years. Does an outstanding job not only preaching at South Cobb and serving as one of the elders there, but also helping to direct the campus here, the Georgia School of Preaching classes. And he has a lineup already he's putting together. It's not quite finished yet, but it will be presented for August. And so early in August, we hope to start our next quarter, get back on the quarter system. Appreciate his work there. I've known Tommy since I started preaching. In fact, I've been preaching just, a few weeks maybe when I got a phone call from him. And we got to know each other, he and his wife and their children, right away. And he was able to kind of immerse me into the world of preachers and the kind of things to expect from working in the church here in Carroll County. And so he did a good job of sticking me down here and helping me to take root. I've been here almost 30 years now, and I appreciate you, brother, for being there in the very early days to encourage me. Now I won't take any more of your time. Come on, brother.
I was shocked whenever I was asked to come back because I had just spoke earlier this year. I rejoice in that fact, and I am just happy as I could be to be back. I wanted to start off by asking you a question. Have you done something today to make a difference in somebody's eternity? Remember, one of the things I try to bring out is the fact that every day we could do something. And I just wanted to start off by asking you that question. A lot of times we just got to think about that every day. What can I do today, just today, to make a difference in somebody's eternity? And I hope and pray, like I said, that we're going to keep on thinking about that no matter what. I, again, appreciate the opportunity to be here. This church is in my heart. I love you. You are a part of me, and part of my family's here, my physical family. But more importantly, you are my spiritual family, and I appreciate that. And I tell you what, you mean more to me than you could ever begin to imagine. And I echo Patrick's words when it comes to the idea of the fact of our friendship with one another. The wise man Solomon said in Ecclesiastes 1, 6 through 9, he says, there is nothing new under the sun. And I hope that as we go through this tonight, as we start talking about this ideal of what Patrick asked me to speak on, postmodernism, I hope to show you that this is not anything that's really new. And as we look at it together, and as we try to come to grips with what the Christian's reaction ought to be when we're talking about this, I hope to be able to help you to see what you need to do as you're dealing with this kind of philosophy. Now, to kind of get this ideal in mind, we have to spend a little bit of time talking about how we got here, what postmodernists believe and teach, and what we can do about it. And again, we have to remember the fact that, and a lot of this tonight is not the kind of sermon that I really like to preach, because a lot of it deals with more philosophy than anything else. But it's some things that we need to think about. Paul, again, the wise man said there's nothing new under the sun. Paul talked about the fact in Colossians chapter 2. He says, beware lest anyone cheat you through philosophy and empty deceit. So obviously in the first century, they were having problems with philosophy. They were having problems with people wanting to bring philosophical ideas into the church. He said, let no one cheat you through that, according to the tradition of men. Now, again, this emphasizes to us, this empty deceit, this philosophy, is according to the tradition, to the ideas, the thoughts of man. And according to the basic principles of the world, and not according to Christ. If we're going to be effective in trying to share the gospel with others, we've got to know a little bit about philosophy. And I remember I only took a couple of courses on that. I enjoyed taking them, but it sometimes gets kind of, what's the words I can use? They get kind of stupid in some of our stuff, okay? I don't know any other way to say it than that. I really try to think of a good word, but whenever you sit and talk to philosophers about some of the things they come up with, after a while you're just sitting there thinking, where did you come up with this? How did you come up with something like this? Whenever Paul was preaching, you think about the fact that he had to deal with this. He warned the church of Colossae concerning philosophy. When you go back to Acts the 17th chapter, you see that when he's preaching in Athens, he has to deal with the philosophers at Athens. In Acts chapter 17, verse 16, while Paul waited for them in Athens, his spirit was provoked within him when he saw that the city was given over to idols. And he reasoned in the synagogue with the Jews and the Gentile worshipers, and in the marketplace daily with those who happened to be there. Then certain Epicurean and Stoic philosophers encountered him, and some said, "What does this babbler want to say?" Others said, "He seems to be a proclaimer of foreign gods because he preached to them Jesus and the resurrection." So they brought Paul to the Areopagus, the Mars Hill, the place where they spoke, and they said, "We want to know this new doctrine of which you speak, for you're bringing some strange things to our ears, therefore we want to know what these things mean." And then he says this about the Athenians that describes our culture today. For all the Athenians, you could put all the Americans and foreigners who were there, spent time in nothing else but either to tell or to hear what? Something new. Doesn't that describe us today? You have a lot of these ideas. So you see, I'm trying to bring out the idea that this is not something new in one sense. We may call it by different names than maybe what they did in the first century, but you still have these various same philosophies. For example, the Epicureans that he mentions here in Acts 17. Their philosophy of life is that this life is all that there is. Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we what? We die. So the bottom line of the thing is, if you're going to get anything, you've got to get it here. You've got to get it now. Now, how would you translate that into modern day philosophy? It's materialism. How many toys can we get? How much can I buy with everything that I've got? It's all about here and now. There's no future life. There's no future ideal of any kind of punishment or reward. So you've got to get what you're going to get right here and right now. And isn't that, well, again, think about it, isn't that the ideal of evolutionists? We're here for a short period of time on this earth. Boom, we're dead, like Rover, dead all over, and that's the end of it. Well, you see, he kind of dealt with that philosophy. Then there was the Stoics. The Stoics had the idea, and that flourished again in ancient Greek and Rome, that people should strictly restrain their emotions in order to attain happiness and wisdom. So the idea is you would never see them smile or show any happiness, but at the same time you would never see them cry. Their idea was the only way to really attain any kind of happiness in this world is to absolutely show no emotion. Don't let anything bother you under any circumstance. Well, a lot of those people in Paul's day believed in these various gods, the Greek and Romans gods, the desire to appease them. I think all of that goes back to Genesis chapter 3 in the Garden of Eden when God killed the animals to make skins, to make clothes for Adam and Eve. And it's my firm belief there in Genesis chapter 3, that's where God begins the ideal of sacrifice. So people all from that point in time have the idea that God wants a sacrifice in an effort to appease him. There were those, at the same time in Athens, that did not necessarily believe in the ideal of God. So the ideal is, they've tried to do this. And as you look at that, that's what the ideal was. For a long period of time throughout history, man has always believed in gods or the God of some sort. The idea there is the philosophy of theism, that everything we do is orchestrated by a God or a God somewhere, and that we have to do whatever we have to do to appease God or gods somewhere. And you see a lot of people, whenever they looked at the world, they say, well, how did it get here? The gods made it. The gods made the ocean. The gods made the sky. The gods made the earth. The gods. And again, in Greek and Roman culture, you had different gods over different parts of creation. In Jewish literature, it was God, right? As we understand him. He did it all. In how many days? 6, and then he rested on the 7th, right? So you see, it was a perversion of what happened in the Garden of Eden, and mankind then started worshiping gods over and over and over in all many different ways. And this went on, brothers and sisters, for years. The ideal of appeasing the gods. And then about the year 1620, we have what is called as the Age of Enlightenment. In 1620 to about 1780, there was a lot of cultural and intellectual forces in Western Europe that emphasized reason, that emphasized analysis, that emphasized individualism rather than God and then the church, the authority of the church, and so forth like that. It was promoted by different philosophies and local thinkers. Now, let me also emphasize this. I'm doing this in a very broad way. There were Greek and Roman philosophers that didn't believe in gods. There were those that were atheistic. But you just don't read that much about them. You read more importantly about guys like Plato and Socrates, who placed a lot of emphasis upon the ideal of reason, the ideal of logic. We talk about Aristotelian logic, and we actually study that. Well, let me say this. We used to actually study that in a lot of colleges, how to think logically. A lot of that come from Aristotle and the Greek philosophers many, many, many years ago. So you have this area of the Age of Enlightenment. These guys would sit around and talk about various philosophers and philosophies. It challenged the authority of institutions that were deeply rooted in society, such as the Roman Catholic Church. It challenged how we could reform society with toleration, science, and sometimes even skepticism. Some of the guys back then are Francis Bacon, John Locke, Isaac Newton, Rene Descartes. So you have a lot of these guys coming out and actually saying these things. And they, after a while, they got to thinking, if we study the world around us, when study it, we know we can then find out what would make it tick. Now, a lot of people would still believe that God created the world and that God would give us the ability to reason and logic to be able to learn what we're able to learn. Folks, think where we are in science today. We could put men on the moon. We could have rockets. We can have computers that could do more. You remember you going back and you read a little bit about the history of computers. Back in the 1950s, it would have taken entire rooms about this big with reel tapes. Now, every last one of us probably have one right here on our hip somewhere or another, right? Or in your purse or something like that. What is a phone but a very small computer in many situations, right? I can get access to anything in the world right now from my phone. You see, then you think about this is what happened. It was the age of science. But what began to happen is the more man studied, the more a shift in thinking took place. Man then becomes the what? He becomes the end all. It's not about God anymore. It's about what can we do. And in 1840 or 1859, a fellow by the name of Charles Darwin wrote a book called On the Origin of the Species. And that totally revolutionized thought. Now, we don't have to have a God to explain all these things. We can explain it through natural processes. Given enough time, given enough opportunity, then this world could have got here by accident without any God being involved whatsoever. Now, let me emphasize again, this was not automatic shifts. People were struggling with a lot of this. Natural theology, the idea that God created everything and we need to study those things, was encouraged by the church in many situations. The Church of England, the idea that God created nature, but with Darwin's book, now you have man really in a systematic way thinking of other ways that this world could have got here without a God. And so now they're looking at things totally differently. Now it's not so much natural theology or theological scientism, it's now natural scientism. We believe in science, but we don't have to have a God in the situation. So, I'm talking in very broad terms here, using a very broad brush. After this comes the area of what we call modernism. And here's what modernism believes. Number one, humans are purely natural material machines. You live in a purely physical world, and nothing exists beyond what is our power to perceive. There is no heaven, there is no hell, because we can't see it. There is no God because we can't see Him. Humanists, in essence, say that we're nothing more than, we're not human beings that have a soul, but we're just what? Physical body. Animals, yeah. Now, I want you to think about this for just a minute. The more we teach this in school, think about it for a minute. Look at the end results of this teaching. Kids come to school with guns, and then we're all shocked out of our gourds because they shoot a school up. But listen, they're only doing what they've been taught. I'm an animal, and I have to be better than the rest of the animals around me, so I'm going to kill the other animals around me. That explains so much of it. And it's always amazing to me whenever the media starts to cover these things, what do? They just like they're shocked that No, they shouldn't be shocked. This is just a natural outgrowth of what they've been taught. Modernists believe that humans are self-governing, and we have their freedom to choose whatever they want. Now, I want you to contrast that idea with what the signers of the Declaration of Independence and the framers of the Constitution said. We hold these truths to be self-evident. That what? That all men are created equal and are endowed by their Maker with certain unalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, in the 1700s, whenever they formed the Constitution and everything, they looked at it from that viewpoint. Well, now, after the 1800s, now they're beginning to sit back and think, well, there's not a maker. There's not a creator. We don't have certain inalienable rights. So they have the idea, modernists have the idea, the view of reason states that we should be optimistic rationalists and that we can figure out any problem that we have. The problem with this is as we figure out more and more and more with science, we also figure out more and more ways to kill. Right? Our scientific knowledge has helped us. Medical science has caused us to live longer than ever before. And again, it's because we've thought these things through. But medical science is now what? It also, not only medical science, but science period, is come up with bombs that could wipe out entire populations just that quick. Right? Boy, we're really good at that. When there is no God, then man is going to rule by what? Power. Who has the most power? And this is one of the key things of postmodernism as we think about it. As you go on back in the 1917, there was religious humanists got together. And they come up with what they called the Humanist Manifesto. You can look these up on the internet and read these. But here's the point that they make. They regard the universe as self-existing and not created. They believe that man is a part of nature and that he's emerged as a result of a continuous process called what? Evolution. They believe that humanists find that the traditional dualism of mind and body must be rejected. In other words, man don't have a soul, so we need to reject that. So they emphasize the idea that the individual born into a particular culture is largely molded by that culture. So why do people act the way they do? It's by social acceptance and what's going on in that respect. They believe that, and I'm just quoting I could go through the entire thing here, but the ideal is they assert that the nature of the universe depicted by modern science makes unacceptable any supernatural or cosmic guarantees of human values. So, you destroy God, then what? There's no values. There is no right and wrong. Okay? Now you see how you see where we're getting to nowadays? You see how we've got there over the last few years? And again, as you're going through here, as you go on and read through this Humanist Manifesto, they emphasize the idea that, let me say this, number 14, the humanists are firmly convinced that existing acquisitive and profit-motive society has shown itself to be inadequate and that a radical change in methods, controls, and motives must be instituted. A socialized and cooperative economic order must be established to the end that the equitable distribution of the means of life be possible. This was written back in 1917. It was updated again in 1970 after World War II. They said, you know what, we had some great dreams, but World War II kind of crashed them down. Think about it just a minute. World War II, Nazism, Germany, what are they living by? Totally evolutionary means. Now, a lot of atheists will sit there and make the argument, well, Hitler was a Christian. Well, he was. He claimed to be a Christian. But what? He didn't live by the Christian principles. You see what I'm trying to say? And he actually believed in the ideal of evolution and the fact that certain races need to live and certain races need to do what? Die. So, and we fought a war to stop that. Now, as you go on, as you see this, now, what begins to happen over the years is people start looking at this whole idea of mankind solving our own problems, and they see situations like World War I, the war to end all wars, and 30 years later, it wasn't even 30 years later, we're fighting another war. Same group of people, different circumstances, all over again. And folks, think about this for just a minute. We haven't stopped fighting wars since World War II. There's always a conflict going around in this world somewhere all the time. Constantly. America itself has been involved in Korea, Vietnam. My dad was there. Iraq, Afghanistan. You know, we could go on and on and on and on, and that's just America, right? We're not talking about all the other nations. We're just talking about America. So what began to happen is some people started looking at all this, and they said, you know what, this really doesn't make sense. We can't solve our own problems. So now they've come up with what is called or known as the ideal of postmodernism. And here's what they believe. Human beings, all of us, are just cogs in a social machine. In other words, it's all about society. It's all about what you can do for society. And that's all there is to it. We are primarily social beings, and we think and move and act according to whatever society we live in. So the ideal is we are the product of our culture, and we only think we are self-governing. You know, we say, well, we're proud, we're Americans, we can run ourselves. No, we just think we do, okay? Our culture runs us. They say that there is no such thing as objective rationality. There is no such thing as reason. Reason is what people think it is, okay? This is where the philosophy gets really weird, okay? They will actually say there is no objective truth, okay? Well, you just made a statement of objective truth there, right? There is no objective truth, but if you said that, then you're just saying, by the virtue of the fact you say there is no objective truth, you just made a statement of objective truth. But that's all right with them, because they throw logic out the window. They say that we've come up with the ideal of logic and the laws of logic, but if you look at, say, Asian cultures, some Asian cultures and some of the cities there, some of those situations believe that you can believe part of truth and then you can see another part of truth that is totally contradictory to the first part, but that's okay. So they're saying what? Truth is what you see it is, and truth is what I see it is. I'm the guy that decides what truth is for me in my life, and you're the guy and you're the person that decides what's truth for you in your life. They say that we're the product of society and society's thinking. They will go ahead and make the statement that there is no human progress. Progress, according to them, is just a code word that talks about the domination of European cultures over other cultures. Okay? So, they actually emphasize this. They say that, and folks, we do need to understand this. Culture does affect our thinking, right? Where we're around, we do. You know, I grew up in the South. I got some definite opinions about some different things because I grew up in the South. So it does affect my thinking in some ways. But think about it in this respect, they exaggerate that. They say, well, that's the only way you can think. So, and they will actually say this. If you're a white American male, you've been part of a culture that represses females, as well as every other race besides Caucasian, but you white American males can't really help it because that's the culture you were brought up in. So now what's got to happen is you white American males need to sit down and shut up because, in essence, all these other nations have been put down by you. So you just need to sit down and not say nothing, while giving all these other races and everybody else an opportunity to do that, and also females. We have, according to them, suppressed all the other races because we thought we were supreme. And then, because we've been the ones that's in the majority, whenever culture shifts and white people are no longer in the majority, guess what? Then that whole thing is going to shift in that respect as well. We cannot think nor reason apart from our culture. A fellow by the name of Karl Marx wrote the Communist Manifesto, and that was his point. So communism and that whole ideal of communism and postmodernism just go hand in hand, glove for one another. The ideal is they're looking for the complete destruction of self, not the bettering of self, but I need to be destroyed as a person so that I could just help the community. It's all about me helping society, and that's the only way I could be used. Whenever I was going to school, I remember, this was the old days, okay, in the 1970s. I had to read the Communist Manifesto by Marx. And I also had to read a book by George Orwell called 1984. And he talked about how people were to think. There was another book, Animal Farm. Never will forget that. where he kind of talked about how Lenin and Trotsky had destroyed Russia, and he used it in the idea that human beings were oppressing the animals on an animal farm. Finally, one day the animals said, we've had enough of this, and they rejected the humans, kicked them off the farm. And so, now somebody has to take charge of the farm. And who takes charge of the farm? It's the pigs. Okay? And I'm reading that, I'm thinking, boy, this is getting interesting. And as you go on through the rest of the book, the pigs are saying, you know, we've got to show these humans, they're going to try to attack us. So they made sure that all the animals got together to fight off all the attacks of the humans. Then the pigs said, you know what else we've got to do? We've got to make our farm better than any other farm around here so that they could know beyond a shadow of a doubt that we're the best farm that there is. And there's this one character in the book, it was a horse. This horse worked himself to death. And finally, toward the end of the book, this horse worked himself to death and they just took him out. The pigs did. They're the ones in charge, right? Very last pages of the book. The animals got together because the pigs and the people were talking. And they all looked in the house where the pigs were. And they said, and the book said they looked from pig to person, and they couldn't tell a difference. That was communism. That's the whole ideal of communism. Certain people led. And so you see, this is what's happening here. And that's what the people are beginning to think. We're insulating ourselves from reality. Whatever society says about truth is true. Whatever society says is true is what is true. I can't judge any other segment of society and what they think because of my culture and the way I grew up. And, so let's think this thing through a little bit. Think this thing through just a little bit as a result of that.
We can't convert anybody.
That's right. Number one, we can't convert anybody. What else? I can't say that homosexuals are wrong because I didn't grow up in their culture. And I cannot say that same-sex marriage is wrong because they want to be married. Now, it's interesting they want to be married like heterosexuals, right? Why do they want that? Think about that for just a minute. Why would they want that? Their own culture saying that they're fine the way they are. Why would they want that? Well, it's not for the purpose of trying to be equal with everybody. No, it's for the purpose of destroying marriage, period. That's the bottom line. You think about anything that's going on today, we think to ourselves, again, truth cannot be self-contradictory. That's the way we think. We understand that. Logic says truth cannot be contradictory. Again, in Asian thought, as I said earlier, truth can be rational and contradictory. So, Buddhists would say this. What is the sound of one hand clapping? I don't know about you, but the more I think about that, I got to stop and I got to go on to something else because there's no such thing. You can't have clapping with just one hand, can you? But you see, they say, what is the sound of one hand clapping? Well, that's contradictory. You can't have one hand clapping. But you see, their way of thinking, no, that's fine. You can do that. There is no rationality or reason. When we state what we perceive as though they are reality, we insulate ourselves from reality. Remember a few years ago, a certain president of the United States said, well, that depends on what the word is means. Right? Postmodernists believe that. They think, well, we assign meaning to words. So, as a result of that, in essence, we can't really know what's true because one person might assign the meaning is as this, and another person might assign the meaning as this. So we can't know what is truth. There's an all-pervasive skepticism in postmodernism. The ideal is they don't have no problem with harvesting human embryos for lab research. They're not humans. They just come to the conclusion they're not humans. We weren't born, folks. We were defined by society. It is social culture that defines whether or not a certain race is human or not. Nazism, right? Think about it. How were they able to kill as many people as they were able to kill? Because they said that they weren't human beings. So we have all these different truths that are out there, and they say all these different truths are not contradictory. Well, who's going to determine what's going to be the truth and how we ought to live? It's the powerful. It's the pigs. Forgive me for the analogy, but that's exactly the idea that he brings out there. Reality is in the eye of the beholder. Now, Are you as confused as I am trying to explain it? But do you also see where we are in this current society and our culture today? Do you see why some people are actually saying this kind of stuff? Do you see where they're coming from? If you throw rationality out, if you say words don't mean anything, then what? Then everything goes. Huh? Yeah. That's right. That's the bottom line. Now let's think about some things. It is self-defeating. They say that we are creations of social construct, but postmodernism itself is a creation of a social construct. In other words, it's what their particular group of people are saying that it truly is. So a lot of times they'll make the statement, well, there is no objective truth. I mentioned that a minute ago, right? But when they made that statement, what have they just, they've contradicted themselves.
Now, all of these are lawyers, right?
No, not necessarily. Not necessarily. We like to think that way, but no, not necessarily. Part of postmodernism has the idea that all human thought is rooted in language. So they really begin to attack language. If you pick up a book like the Bible, and every last one of us here believe that this is written by God, right? Amen?
Amen.
And we believe that God spoke, written by these certain men that he inspired, and that as we read these words, we can know God's will, right? That's what we all believe, or we wouldn't be sitting here, right? But if you're a postmodernist, you wouldn't necessarily believe that. They say that words are ambiguous, and they'll go to the dictionary and show you 5 or 6 definitions of the same word, right? Well, we know how that makes sense. I can go to the grocery store so I can buy some food to store. I know how that word store is used in both of those situations. We all do, right? Well, they say, no, you're assigning meaning to the word store that only makes sense to you. Really? Did everybody understand what I was saying a moment ago? Of course you did. But you see, they're saying that we assign the meaning to the words. So what a word or idea means in one culture does not mean the same in another. So we cannot know what any word means that we assign it to mean. Now the problem with this is, and they won't really honestly face it, is if I go into another culture, and next month I'm going to go back to Costa Rica, I'm in a whole totally foreign culture to me. But it's their culture. But you know what? I have some friends there that can translate, and we can pretty well understand one another. We can get across ideas to one another, even though it's across 2 different languages. And those folks that are able to speak 3 or 4 languages, I'm not blessed with that ability, they're able to convey certain ideas across in every language that they speak. But you see, they say we can't do that because words don't always mean the same thing. So, what they say is this. Now think about this. Postmodernists state that when you read a book, the only real meaning is not the meaning the author intended, but whatever you want it to mean. Whatever the reader and your construct and your society, whatever you want it to mean. Now, folks, I want you to think about this because this has been our way, or some people's way of studying the Bible for years. Right? Right? I don't care necessarily about what God is saying here. What does this mean to me? I get frustrated sometimes whenever I'm in a Bible class and somebody, and I know what they're trying to say, but don't misunderstand me. I'm not a postmodernist. I do understand what words mean. Okay, but somebody says, well, what does that passage mean to you? Folks, we should never be concerned about what a passage means to us. We should always be concerned, what is God saying in that passage? Now you see, that's the issue. That's the issue, but we've done that. That's the reason why the Lord, you think about, why do we have so many denominations today? You've got the same book. Why do you have so many denominations? Well, I want it to say what I want it to mean, right? Or what our particular social construct is, our particular denomination. That's why it is imperative for us in the Lord's church that we constantly study Scripture, not to prove things that we've already believed, but to see if the things we believe are truly taught in the Bible or not. Amen? Now, I think it's important for us to understand that. Brothers and sisters, think about it in this respect. Think about the law. If you have been listening at any time at all over the last few years, there's been a lot of people talking about we need to redo the Constitution. Now why? Well, it was okay for those folks, for white men in the 18th century, the 17th, whenever they made it, 1785. It was okay for them, but it's not okay for us today because words have changed their meaning. And the Constitution doesn't fit homosexual marriage. No, because they never dreamed that was going to be a possibility in our country. You see what I'm trying to say?
It wouldn't be today if it wasn't for the judges.
And there you go. So, we're hearing clamor that we need to change the Constitution. All of our history books, all of our history that we've learned, we need to throw it out. Because history is always written by the who? By the winners, right? So the bottom line is you can't trust any history written by any one person. Do what? Well, that's true, but they're saying in essence that it's written by the winners, so you can't trust history written by any one person. No interpretation is better than any other interpretation. Now again, before we get thinking about this a little bit more, this is what's been played out for years in the church and in the world. Think about the whole instrumental music question, right? We are discussing and having this discussion over and over again in the instrumental music. Why? Because some folks say, well, I just don't see it that way. I can worship God ever how I want to please, I heard this last week. I started studying it, but I heard of a preacher of a Church of Christ in this area, one of the bigger churches of Christ, that studied the instrumental music issue for 20 years, and he said he don't see anything in the world wrong with it. So before too much longer, in this area, there will be an instrumental Church of Christ. All right, now, have we got it wrong all this time? What does God want? And brothers and sisters, it's not just instrumental music. There's the problem of women and their role in the church, right? Have we got it wrong all these years? Do we understand what the Bible says about it? Do we understand 1 Timothy chapter 2? Do we understand 1 Corinthians chapter 14? Do we understand that that's what God is saying to us? That's the reason why we don't do what we do. Well, that was written in a different culture, remember? That's what the argument. It was written in a different culture, in a different time, and it doesn't apply to us today. You see, this pervasiveness of this idea is more widespread than what we really begin to think that it is, isn't it? It's not just those liberals out there. It's folks that we deal with on a day-by-day basis. And I'm reminded of another passage in Judges where he said there was no king in Israel. Every man did that which was right in his own eyes. Why? My truth. That's the way I look at things. I can do whatever I want to do because it's my truth. That's where we are. That's where we are. So you think about it. Think about how it's been not only, language is self-contradictory and ambiguous. There's no objective linkage between words and reality. We can assign a certain meaning to a word, and if we do that, then we become word-centered, and we're not trying to help everybody else out. Think about how this is true, how this is playing out in our education system. We're not teaching children facts anymore in our education system. We're trying to make them feel what? Good. Self-esteem is the most important thing. True fact. Didn't realize this, but back in the 1990s, a survey was done. And they tried to find out, and they asked the students, how many of you feel good about yourself? How many of you feel good about your work and your homework, whatever it is? This is what they found. They found American children growing up, and this is 1990s now, okay? So now I'm talking 20 years ago. They found that most American children felt very good about themselves. But most American children, when they started comparing them with everybody else across the world, they didn't match up in math skills, in language skills, in any of the other skills, in science. Man, they found out that the Koreans didn't feel very good about themselves But buddy, they knew math up one side and down the other. And then we're sitting there scratching our heads saying, why aren't we succeeding like we once were in this country? Well, we're trying to make everybody feel good about themselves. We do it in church, right? Don't preach about sin. Don't tell me I need to repent. Don't tell me that I need to change my life. Just make me feel good. Help me to walk out of there feeling good about myself. If you don't make me feel good, I'll go someplace where it's going to make me feel good.
Or I will replace you.
Yeah, or we will replace the preacher. That's right. Think about law. Again, we believe in law. Romans 13 emphasizes the idea that God gives government, and the purpose that he gives government is for what purpose? To control the evildoer, right? We understand that. We believe that we need to live by laws. Well, think about this for just a minute. If everybody can do whatever they want to, then the law don't necessarily apply to me, because why? It just don't apply to me. That law don't apply to me, right? So I can do whatever I want to do. And woe be to the man that tries to tell me that I can't do what I want to do. Right? I can live my life any way that I want to, and that's just that. So what really they argue is the powerful in charge, the poor and the minorities are excluding from interpreting the law their way. And so laws are written by the powerful to protect their self-interest. I have about 5 more minutes. 3. Okay. I can't see that clock. Okay. That hour hand just tells me I've got 5 more minutes, so that's where I'm going. All right.
When the babies come in.
Okay. Bottom line is we don't have to obey law anymore. Are we there today in America? Are we having these long discussions about police and how they treat? Now, are there corrupt police officers? Yes. Are there corrupt preachers? Yes. Are there corrupt people? Yes. But does that give me the right not to obey the law? No. But you see, it does to the postmodernist. Think about it again. In religion, the greatest sin is the sin of intolerance. Right? The Eastern views of religion are now being, I want that altered consciousness. Drugs are used. The worship of God has turned to the worship of myself. I want to be made happy. So you see, they are the source of truth. Some things I want to remind you of in the last 2 minutes. Number one, truth is not dead, folks. Now, here's the thing I really want us to get across. I've talked about this a lot. Do we believe the Bible?
Yes, amen.
And that's the question. Do we believe in the miracles of the Bible? Last week I spoke at Bremen. I talked about the water turning to blood, one of the 10 plagues. And I brought out the idea that a lot of times we try to come up with ways to try to explain those miracles in the Bible in naturalistic ways. The moment we do that, we're saying, okay, if I can't understand this in a naturalistic way, in a material way, then I'm not going to believe it. And the moment we do that, we've given up every right to stand for what God says. You see what I'm saying? So we've got to ask ourselves the question, do we really believe it or not? We did this so that we wouldn't be out of sync with science. We're trying to pacify the scientific cloud. We wanted to be what? We want to sound like we're smart, but it's caused unbelief in the churches. This has affected our belief. I heard a bell. Okay. A culture that is a church that has abandoned God's moral revelation has nothing to offer a lost culture. When we stop believing this, folks, it's over. It's over. That's just all there is to it. Culture does not construct reality. Christianity is universal. It crosses all kinds of cultures, don't it? And that's what we need to believe. And that's what we need to be preaching to people. And brothers and sisters, we need to be the ones that's leading people. Postmodernism really brings about loneliness in people's hearts. They don't know what to believe. They just feel lonely. They feel like they're all by themselves. We have the answer. It's Jesus Christ. And we need to help people to see that. God has made us a social being. But God has provided for that social being in the church, right? Why do you come to church? I need encouragement. I need encouragement. Bottom line is, this is going to be a doctrine that our young people are dealing with constantly. We've got to be willing to live the truth to show them that there is an alternative and to help them to be what we need to be. Folks, you can make a difference in somebody's eternity.